Something strange happened inside the walls of Buckingham Palace again, and this time the whispers are louder, the security tighter, and the question echoing through royal corridors is more chilling than before. Why did Prince Louis say those words again? Because according to insiders who claim to have witnessed the moment unfold, the youngest child of Prince William and Catherine casually repeated a mysterious phrase that had already sent palace security into quiet panic months earlier. A phrase that was never supposed to resurface. A phrase that, according to hushed conversations among royal aides, triggered the reopening of internal security protocols that had been sitting dormant for years. And when the words left Louis's mouth again, the atmosphere inside the palace reportedly shifted from polite royal routine to something far colder and far more urgent. The moment reportedly began during what should have been a completely ordinary royal family gathering behind closed doors. No cameras, no cheering crowds, just a quiet afternoon where the family believed they could finally relax after a week of official appearances. Staff moved through the corridors the way they always do, quietly, efficiently, trained to remain invisible. But according to palace insiders, Louis suddenly said something that froze the room mid-conversation. The exact phrase has never been officially confirmed, but several aides reportedly recognized it immediately because it was the same sentence that had once caused a ripple of unease during a previous public appearance. The first time it happened, many people dismissed it as a child's imagination. Louis had been known for his playful personality during royal balcony appearances. He waved enthusiastically, he made funny faces. The public loved him for it, but insiders claimed the situation had not been nearly as lighthearted behind the scenes. Because during that earlier moment, Louis had apparently leaned toward a guard and whispered something strange, something that made the guard stiffen instantly before discreetly communicating with another member of security. At the time, the crowd below Buckingham Palace had no idea anything unusual had happened. Flags were waving, cameras were flashing. The royal family continued smiling for the crowd, but behind those carefully practiced smiles, subtle movements were already unfolding. Guards repositioned themselves. A senior aide stepped closer to Catherine, and within minutes, the entire balcony appearance ended earlier than originally planned. The official explanation? Nothing unusual, just a slightly shortened appearance. But inside the palace walls, things reportedly looked very different. Because according to sources familiar with internal royal security operations, the words Louis had spoken triggered a quiet internal review. Staff began checking security logs. Guards revisited surveillance footage, and aides who had heard the phrase reportedly exchanged uneasy glances because they believed they had heard something similar before. Months passed. The moment faded from public memory. Royal appearances continued as normal. Louis returned to being the playful young prince people loved watching during ceremonies, and for a while, it seemed as though whatever had caused the quiet panic that day had simply been forgotten. Until now. Because according to several royal watchers and insiders who claim to have heard about the incident, Louis unexpectedly repeated the same phrase during a private family gathering. No balcony, no cameras, just family members and a handful of trusted staff. And the moment those words were spoken again, the reaction inside the room was reportedly immediate. One aide allegedly went completely silent. Another reportedly left the room within seconds. And a member of security staff quietly stepped outside to make a call that insiders say triggered an internal review within minutes. What makes the situation even stranger is that the phrase Louis reportedly used isn't something a 5-year-old would normally say. Several people familiar with palace operations claim the sentence contains wording connected to a long-forgotten internal security report dating back decades. A report that very few people inside the royal household were ever meant to see. According to whispers circulating among royal insiders, that report involved unexplained security anomalies recorded inside Buckingham Palace many years ago. The document was reportedly filed quietly and archived, considered irrelevant and never discussed publicly again. But the wording Louis repeated allegedly appears inside that same document, which leads to the question that has reportedly been circulating inside palace walls ever since: how could a child possibly know those words? Some insiders believe the explanation could be completely innocent. Children repeat things they overhear all the time. Perhaps Louis heard a fragment of conversation between adults. Perhaps it was something mentioned casually by a member of staff. Perhaps it meant nothing at all. But not everyone inside the palace believes it was that simple. Because according to a source familiar with the situation, the phrase Louis repeated wasn't something commonly spoken in normal conversation. It was obscure, specific, and strangely identical to wording found in that old internal report. And that is exactly why, according to rumors spreading quietly through royal circles, security protocols were reportedly tightened again shortly after the incident. Not publicly, not dramatically, but subtly enough that those who work inside the palace noticed. Extra guards were allegedly assigned to certain areas. Access to specific wings of Buckingham Palace was reportedly restricted. A review of internal communication logs was quietly initiated, and several aides were instructed not to discuss the matter out outside official channels. None of this has been confirmed publicly, of course. Buckingham Palace rarely comments on internal security matters, and when it does, the statements are carefully worded and extremely limited, but the silence surrounding the incident has only fueled speculation. Because the story raises a strange possibility that some royal observers find difficult to ignore, what if the words Louis repeated were not random at all? What if they were connected to something buried deep in palace history? Several royal historians have pointed out that Buckingham Palace has been the center of countless confidential security operations over the decades. During the Cold War, the palace was monitored for espionage threats. Intelligence services maintained quiet observation points nearby. Communications networks were occasionally intercepted during international visits. In other words, the palace has always been a place where secrets quietly circulate behind ceremonial traditions. And according to rumors now spreading through royal gossip circles, the phrase Louis repeated may be connected to one of those forgotten chapters. An internal investigation is reportedly examining archived documents from the early 2000s, a period when palace security reportedly logged a series of unusual communications anomalies within one section of the building. The file was labeled insignificant at the time, but insiders claim it contained one strange line that analysts could never fully explain. A sentence describing an unknown signal reportedly intercepted within palace walls. And according to the whispers now echoing through royal corridors, that sentence is almost identical to the one Prince Louis repeated. The coincidence alone has been enough to trigger renewed attention among security officials who would normally dismiss such rumors instantly. Because if the phrase really did originate from that archived report, it raises an unsettling question. Who else inside the palace knows about it? Louis had reportedly been sitting near his mother, Catherine, during a quiet family moment when he suddenly looked toward a hallway leading deeper into the palace and repeated the same mysterious sentence that had caused so much quiet tension months earlier. The words were not loud, they were not shouted, they were spoken casually, almost like an observation rather than a statement. But according to whispers that later circulated among royal staff, the effect was instant. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. One aide froze where they stood, and someone reportedly asked Louis, very gently, where he had heard those words. The child's response, according to people familiar with the moment, was even more unsettling. He reportedly said he hadn't heard it from anyone. He said he just knew it. That single response reportedly sent a wave of silent tension through the room. Because while adults might dismiss a child's imagination, the problem was that the phrase itself was not imaginary. It was real. It had been written down years earlier inside an internal palace report that very few people even knew existed. Inside Buckingham Palace, security is not something taken lightly. Every corridor, every doorway, every wing of the palace is mapped through layers of protocol developed over decades. Guards are trained not only to respond to visible threats, but also to patterns, anomalies, and anything that seems even slightly out of place. And that is why, according to rumors now spreading through royal circles, Louis's repeated phrase triggered something very specific: a quiet internal escalation. Not an emergency, not a public announcement, but a protocol that insiders say is used when something unusual cannot yet be explained. Within hours of the second incident, security teams reportedly began reviewing surveillance logs once again. Cameras covering internal hallways were checked, entry records were examined, staff movement schedules were quietly analyzed. No official statement was issued, but several members of palace staff allegedly noticed subtle changes almost immediately. Certain corridors that were normally open were temporarily restricted. Security personnel began rotating through different positions more frequently. And according to one insider who later spoke privately to a royal correspondent, even some senior aides appeared unsettled by the renewed attention surrounding the phrase. What makes the situation even more mysterious is the origin of the phrase itself. The archived document where the sentence allegedly first appeared dates back more than 2 decades. At the time, palace analysts were reviewing a minor communications irregularity that had been detected during routine internal monitoring. The report mentioned a strange line of wording that had appeared in an unexplained signal recorded inside the east wing of Buckingham Palace. The wording itself was short, cryptic, and impossible to explain. Analysts had written it down, examined it briefly, and eventually dismissed it as a harmless anomaly. The file was archived, sealed away in palace records where it remained forgotten for years, until the moment Prince Louis unknowingly repeated the same words. Royal historians who later learned about the rumored connection have pointed out something interesting about Buckingham Palace that the public rarely considers. The palace is not simply a residence or ceremonial building. It is also one of the most historically layered locations in Britain. Over centuries, rooms have been added, corridors redesigned, hidden service routes built and sealed, and communication systems installed and replaced. In other words, Buckingham Palace is a place where history and secrecy have often existed side by side. During wartime, confidential operations were coordinated from its halls. During diplomatic crises, sensitive conversations took place behind doors that were never meant to be opened by the public. public. Intelligence agencies occasionally maintain discreet communication channels connected to the palace during high-level visits, which means that within those walls, many things have been recorded, written down, archived, and quietly forgotten. The phrase Louis reportedly repeated may have been one of those forgotten details, but the coincidence of hearing it again, decades later, from the mouth of a 5-year-old prince has been enough to make some palace officials uncomfortable. Because even if the explanation is completely innocent, the timing alone is strange. Several insiders believe Louis may simply have overheard a conversation somewhere inside the palace. Perhaps a member of staff mentioned the phrase while discussing historical security records. Perhaps it was spoken casually during a briefing. Children are incredibly observant, and Louis is known for listening closely to the adults around him. But other observers inside royal circles believe the situation may be slightly more complicated. And each time he has done it, the reaction inside palace walls has been the same: silence, concern, and a sudden tightening of security that no one outside the palace has been officially allowed to explain. For a monarchy built on centuries of carefully controlled appearances, moments like this are exactly the kind